Wall Street Journal's Washington Bureau. 6 of the staff will take your calls, including Bureau Chief Gerald Seib. Washington Journal, live at 7 a.m. Eastern. Washington Journal continues.
Mr. Cockburn, who are the Shiites of Iraq?
Well, they are the various things. They are members of a sect of Islam, which has existed almost as long as Islam itself, who form the majority in Iraq. Overall, in the world, they are the minority in Islam. But in Iraq, they constitute about 60% of the population.
And where do they live?
They live mostly, well, they live all over, mostly in the south. From Baghdad on south, the population, particularly in the area of the 2 rivers, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, is predominantly Shia. Also in Baghdad itself, which is half Shia.
And Karbala is a holy city for the Shia? It's
a very holy city. It is a holy city because it is built on the site of a battle that took place in 680 AD, when the grandson of the Prophet was killed in a battle with his opponents, and he is considered, along with his half-brother, they are sort of like some of the 2 of the founding martyrs of the Shia faith.
What defines the difference between the Shiites and the Sunnis?
Well, it's on various levels. At its simplest and originally, I mean, Shia means partisans of Ali. And if I could make it as brief and simple as possible, Ali was the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. It is the belief of the Shia that he should have been the immediate successor of the Prophet and to be followed by the Prophet's family, by his descendants. But instead, what happened was other more distantly related or even unrelated followers of the Prophet became his successors, although Ali did succeed as the 4th caliph briefly before he was assassinated. So at its simplest or crudest level, it's a discussion about who succeeded the Prophet. But there are much deeper and more profound differences in the two faiths.
Our phone lines are open for you to join in the discussion with Andrew Cockburn and to talk about his article in the Smithsonian Magazine, Iraq's Oppressed Majority. Our first call for this segment comes from Salt Lake City, Utah. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
I just wanted to know what your take was on the relationship between the Sunni Muslims and the Shiite Muslims, and also the Kurds with regard to the rebuilding of Iraq. And do you think that would be something that would be a workable solution for all 3 of these groups to coexist together in a democratic environment? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, there's a school of thought that says that the 3 communities in Iraq, the Shia, we've been discussing, the Sunni, who live mostly in the center of the country and have been ruling it for since Iraq was conceived by the British in the 1920s, and the Kurds in the north, who are also Sunni, can't live together. That it's like these are 3, they're so distinct and have so many differences that it's better that they should go their own ways. I disagree, as do most Iraqis. You asked that question too, and I think, answer your question, I think they can work together. I think there's no real history. Well, there is, unfortunately, have been some incidents recently, but basically there's no real history of communal antagonism between Shia and Sunni. You've had Sunni governments that have oppressed the Shia, most notably under Saddam. But to my mind, it's not like Beirut or Northern Ireland, where you have real sort of sectarian tensions.
Next up is San Diego, California. Go ahead, please.
With the 2 differences in the religions, how could they ever hope to come together with one Iraq?
Well, I mean, the difference is, they're profound, but they're sort of philosophical differences. I mean, again, it's not like, sort of more extreme differences that you have, as I just mentioned, in Lebanon and Northern Ireland are the examples are usually touted. First of all, most of them, they think they can. I mean, they're adherents of Islam, and they even the sort of like the Shia leader, for example, Ayatollah Sistani, who's the most influential figure in the Shia community. I mean, he has said made it clear that he wants an Iraq that's not only, Sunni, I mean, he would certainly say that, but also non-Muslim communities like the Christians, the large Christian community in Iraq. So it's not, we don't really have a precedent, at least, for arguing that they can't live together.
The subhead in your article reads, "For nearly a century, the nation's 15 million Shiite Muslims have been denied access to political power. How their demands are met in the months to come could well determine Iraq's future." How so?
Well, because since Iraq was invented, basically, by the British when they conquered that part of the world from the Ottoman Turks in the First World War, power has been in the hands of Sunnis. The British, there was initially a decision taken by the British to put power in the hands of a small group, really, of the sort of Sunni elite in Baghdad, and with a Sunni king, which they imported from outside. And the Shia, whose proportion of the population has been going up over the years, they felt, although they were not, completely oppressed, and many of them, in some ways, they dominated the economy, but they were never really, had their strength reflected in political terms in Baghdad. And under Saddam, where the whole country was ruled by this narrow clique of, his fellow tribesmen from around Tikrit, of course they had no in at all. So now they feel, well, Saddam's gone, and no one does repression like Saddam. So, now they feel that if there's a proper democratic process in Iraq, they will willy-nilly be properly represented. And if they're not, there's going to be trouble.
Johnson City, Tennessee, you're on the Washington Journal.
Yes, I'm glad I finally got on it. I was trying to get on before and get hung up on. I could only hope for the best for the Iraqi people, but with this administration, I don't know that they're concerned about freedom here, but they are they say, but I don't know that we're concerned about freedom here. I'm hearing, I can't even get on your phone lines hardly. We're hearing nothing but Republican people defending Republicans no matter what, this Democrat bashing, Clinton bashing still. So maybe you will get luckier than this country is. I hope you do.
Thank you for your call. Next up is Danville, Illinois, on the supporters line.
Yes, I would like to ask Mr. Cockburn, why is it, and neither one of you have brought it up, what about the Wahhabis? How do they figure into this? Aren't they the ones that are being supported by the House of Saud, and the House of Saud does not really want to play any part in keeping them down? And why does all presidents that I voted for since I was 21, Kennedy included and up, well, not Kennedy, I wasn't 21 then, they don't want to make Saudi Arabia behave because they think we have to bow at their door of oil.
Thank you.
Well, there's certainly there's a paranoia, if you like, in Iraq that, the Wahhabis, particularly among the Shia, that the Wahhabis, who would be adherents of the very austere form of Islam promoted particularly in Saudi Arabia, that they are, they are behind a lot of the attacks, and that they Wahhabis have a particularly they don't like Shia. It is true that Saddam, in his declining, his last years, when he was casting around for whatever support he could find, let fundamentalist Sunnis, he encouraged them, if you will, because, as I say, he was looking for political support. Previously, he and his party had been very militantly secular and sort of anti-religious, and had certainly not looked for fundamentalist support. So the Wahhabis grew in strength in Saddam's last years, and now I'm afraid in some parts of the particularly Sunni areas like Fallujah, they seem to have gained a lot of strength, and it's going to be problems for the future.
The AP writes this morning that Iran has just signed a key accord opening its nuclear facilities to unfettered and unannounced inspections, a Western demand amid lingering suspicions that Tehran is concealing an atomic weapons program. Will this have any effect on Iraq, given the change going on in Iraq right now?
Well, the Iranians, I think in Tehran, there is no sort of single clear decision on what to do about Iraq. From what I understand, there are different arguments about should we help the Americans, should we make life difficult for the Americans, who do we support in Iraq? I mean, do we... originally there's one major party that's represented in the governing council, the SIRI, Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, which was very much over the years was supported by Iran. There are signs that the Iranians are rather disappointed in the performance of SIRI in Iraq now. So yes, I think it represents, that this agreement, represents the desire of significant factions in Tehran to have good relations with the West, and certainly they were very frightened when the US suddenly started denouncing them for having a nuclear weapon. They thought, oh my God, we might be headed for the same fate as Iraq. So I think they were keen to play ball, but it may have a difference in Iraq, I don't know.
Coraville, Iowa.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if the guest has any knowledge of the number of civilian Iraqi casualties as well as the number of casualties of conscripted Iraqi soldiers. I'm also interested as to why this has not even been mentioned by the press, why we have ignored the number of deaths. I've seen a couple of websites that estimate over 10,000 deaths of Iraqi civilians, and which of course far exceeds the number of people killed in 9/11. I wonder if you have any comment.
Well, it's true. We don't know the precise number of Iraqi civilians or anything close to a precise number, partly because it's been a matter of policy for the CPA, the Occupational Authority, not to collect such statistics. In fact, this week they told the Iraqi Ministry of Health to stop trying to collect those statistics. So maybe that we'll never know. At least, there was some... Sometimes, there are very sort of wild theories of how many people have been killed. Going back to the first Gulf War, when I saw estimates, I remember estimates of 100,000 people, which turned out not to be true. The number killed was, I think the estimates I've seen around, the sort of unofficial counts have been, I think, around 7,000, 8,000, with about 50,000 wounded. I think in a way what's more significant is since Iraq is an ongoing environmental disaster and has been certainly since the first Gulf War, for whatever reason, maybe the use of depleted uranium ammunition or whatever, there's many theories for this, the sort of long-term cost of the disruption of services, of the widespread pollution, that is horrendous. And I think, the real cost of the Iraqi civilian population is going to be ongoing, way above the still, rather shocking numbers of people who were killed directly in the war.
Detroit, Michigan, you're on the Washington Journal.
Yes. What do you feel about the moderating influences of Mohammed Saeed al-Ashmawi?
Well, he's, there are many moderate voices, particularly in the religious establishment. I mean, we tend to, any time someone, some cleric in Baghdad makes a fiery speech, they get the attention. But I think, as I said earlier, I think that the major desire, actually at a lot of levels in Iraq, among most people, is for some kind of sensible solution to all this.
You recently visited Iraq for this article. Tell us how the Shia feel now that Saddam has been captured. How do they feel about their lot in Iraq?
Well, they're absolutely thrilled that Saddam has been captured. I mean, their suffering directly at his hands was immense, particularly in the aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War, when they rose up in rebellion, and the rebellion was put down, with many massacres, attended by many massacres. I mean, they've been digging up mass graves since this war. They've been finding mass graves all over southern Iraq, who were mostly filled with the victims of that consequences of that uprising. So now they feel that he's gone, the old monster's gone. And as we were discussing earlier, they feel that their time is now, that they should be allowed their proper place in the sun.
Will they be looking for retribution from the people who associated themselves with Saddam?
Well, they're not only looking for retribution, they're actually taking it. I mean, that's a rather sort of sinister process that's underway in the South and has been for the last couple of months, I'd say, that dead bodies of Baathist officials are turning up all over the place. In fact, one Baathist was torn to pieces in the streets of Najaf yesterday. So,
Philadelphia, go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. Happy holidays to both of you. My comment is, if democracy is supposed to be the majority rules, why is it this administration, the Bush administration, supports the minority over there? It's not done anywhere in the world that democracy goes with the minority. I just don't get it.
Well, a lot of Shia are asking the same question. I mean, it's not that the administration is explicitly supporting the Sunni minority, but what they are doing is dragging their heels on holding elections. I mean, the fundamental demand of the Shia leadership, of the Ayatollah Sistani, who, as I mentioned, is the most influential figure in the Shia community, is that they should have elections, that the people who write the new Iraqi constitution should be elected, and any government that takes power should be elected. And it does seem that the occupation authority and the administration here are dragging their feet on that. It's partly, I think, because they're frightened of seeing an Islamic, something too overtly Islamic emerging as the government in Iraq, which I think is probably an exaggerated fear. They might fear that such a government will be too friendly to Iran, and also their allies among the Iraqi governing council that's there now, a lot of them don't want an election for reasons. Some of them feel they may not be elected, and there's various complicated reasons. But I agree that, and the Shia would agree with you, why not have elections?
Jim Hoagland writes in the op-ed section of this morning's Washington Post, the Sunnis now have a fundamental choice. They can come to terms with a democratic Iraq in which other groups will also wield power, or they can continue to tolerate or even shield the Ba'athist remnants and foreign terrorists responsible for appalling carnage in their country. The pressure on the Sunni community to make the right choice should not be relaxed. Is that pressure coming from the Shia?
No, the pressure is really coming from the occupation, from the U.S. military occupation. I think it's kind of misguided the way they're going about it. It is true that the Sunni were the top dogs. I mean, they were, especially under Saddam's rule, and in fact even before. I mean, the Sunni, and particularly allies of Saddam, had the rewards. It's true what Hoagland says. I mean, that the question of what happens with the Sunni community is absolutely crucial. I think the real solution is, or part of the problem is, that a lot of people in the Sunni community feel disenfranchised. They feel, now they've been dealt out of, the equation for the future, and therefore they might as well. They feel oppressed, and the occupation is very oppressive in those areas. So they might as well, fight. I think if they're given a stake, and I go back again, I think this idea of elections is excellent. I think that if people everyone feels they have a chance to take part in the political dialogue, I think you'll see a decline in the violence, and I think you'd see more Iraqis feeling that they have a stake in the new Iraq.
Richmond, Virginia, you're on with Andrew Cockburn.
Good morning, gentlemen. Is there any Arab country where the Sunni and the Shia have shared power without violence?
Well, the Shia have tended not to have power. In Lebanon now, I mean, there was violence, but you can look to Lebanon, where there is actually a Shia majority, but the country is peaceful. I mean, they got over their civil war. There are other countries where there are Shia majorities, Azerbaijan, which maybe is an untypical example, Bahrain, which has a Sunni ruler, and there is simmering discontent. But they, as I said, that the Shia have traditionally been oppressed, and in fact it's very much considered often the religion of the oppressed. And I think that the acceptable, and as I should have mentioned, Iran is the single example where the Shia are in the overwhelming majority and have ruled for many hundreds of years. The Sunni-Shia intercommunal violence, nevertheless, tends to be rare. I mean, there are 10% of the population even of Iran is Sunni, and there are cases of, Sunni mosques being burnt. But again, it doesn't seem to be a huge issue. So I think, we tend to instinctively sort of knee-jerk response. So, these two groups can never get along. In fact, I think there's no reason why they shouldn't.
Explain the difference in the use of the terms Shiite and Shia.
It's a very tough one. As far as I can see, it really doesn't matter. It's in Iraq, people tend to say Shia, but basically there's no. Some scholars might be able to detect a difference, but I haven't.
Next up is Baltimore, Maryland. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to make some comment about Iraq and the situation over there. As I am watching the news, I feel that we are not having a political agenda over there, and we are trying in some parts of Iraq to bring the democracy into that country with the force of arm. And also, I feel that the U.S. Government is trying to show its casualties and the ugliness of a war, show that it does not show the true casualties. And also, we never have seen any wounded soldiers, American, or any killed American soldiers on the camera. Also, I would like to say that to begin with, not having United Nations behind us and not having other major power of the world behind us in this thing and also not knowing exactly the culture and background, ethnic background of that area has caused a lot of problem today for us. All of the neighbors of Iraq and all other major powers of the world, they have interest in Iraq, and all of them try to influence over there, and they would not let us to bring a government make a government inside of Iraq, and they all try to influence their own interest. And
we'll leave it there. Go ahead, sir.
Well, yes, it's there's a lot to answer there. I mean, it's the U.S. Yes, the U.S. obviously is going to try and put I don't think they're actually concealing casualties, although they tend to, if there's an incident where soldiers are wounded but not killed, it's often not reported. But obviously, like any government, they're going to try and put the best face on things.
Should there be a Shia majority in the government in Iraq, is there a possibility that Iraq and Iran could form some sort of an alliance?
Not in the way that people fear, I don't think. I mean, the bogeyman that why, going back to the 1991, why the U.S. in effect betrayed the Shia, having asked them to rise up. George Bush famously said on television, he asked people to rise up in rebellion, and they did, because he'd said so. I mean, they were encouraged by that. And then, as every Shia remembers very vividly, the U.S. stood aside while they were massacred. And the reason for that, part of the reason for that seems to be that there was a fear in Washington that, a Shia takeover, even just in the South, might lead to, vast increase in Iranian influence. But in fact, the Iraqi Shia are different. It's a different tradition in lots of ways from the Iranian Shia. And in fact, the Iraqi Ayatollahs, the Iraqi religious leadership, didn't think much of Ayatollah Khomeini's view that clerics, that the clerics should rule. They don't feel that. They feel differently, or some of them do, but the leadership doesn't agree with that. And it's so, I think, there are so many points of difference that's a bogeyman that shouldn't really be allowed to dominate the debate.
In addition to being a contributing writer for the Smithsonian Magazine, Andrew Cockburn is also a producer for 60 Minutes and a contributing editor to Vanity Fair. Next up is Chicago, Illinois. Good morning.
Hello?
Good morning, Chicago.
Yes, I am an Assyrian from Iraq, and I feel the most disenfranchised member of the Iraqi community. I feel that no one seems to be recognizing our rights, not those within the country and not anyone outside in this world. And I would I would expect your guest, who is a British background, to have a very good idea of our history in Iraq. Why is it that no one mentions the Assyrian name? We are not just Christians. We are Assyrians.
Well, that's right. I mean, there is, there is a very ancient and important Assyrian community in Iraq, and it is very important that the rights of Assyrians, as with other minorities, many minorities in Iraq, should be recognized. And it is a very legitimate concern that if, as I've been saying, everything, we have elections and permit majority rule, it is obviously a vital concern that any constitutional arrangement that's erected take account of the position of minorities and make sure they're protected.
Earlier I misspoke. It is your wife, in fact, who is
Correct.
the producer for 60 Minutes and a contributing editor to Vanity Fair.
That's right.
How did the Shia relate to Ambassador Paul Bremer?
Well, I mean, they're slightly suspicious in the sense that Bremer, I think when the Bremer, as representing the Americans, arrived, he didn't quite understand the significance of the religious leadership, because and particularly the significance of this figure Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who, if you saw his house, you would think this can't be the most influential man in Iraq. It's a sort of decrepit house, sort of little house down a decrepit alley and alleyway in the back streets of Najaf. Yet he is a figure of enormous influence and moral authority there. So Bremer originally, and particularly during the summer, was making these arrangements for the future of Iraq, future of the occupation, without really taking much account of what Ayatollah Sistani was saying, which was forget any idea of creating a constitution and a political process without elections. And I think in the last few weeks, or the last month really, we've seen signs that Bremer and the occupation have woken up to this fact, and that they have to find some way of dealing with the demands of Sistani. They may think they have already done so, but I think there's a ways to go yet.
What will be the participation of the Shia in the trial of Saddam Hussein, should that take place in Iraq?
Well, I don't think they'll be participating as Shia. I mean, that they'll be participating, the whatever court we end up with, an Iraqi court, which will have Iraqis. Some of them will be Shia, some will be Sunni, but certainly the Shia will be testifying as to their, as the group, the single group that suffered the most under Saddam's rule.
Next up is Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Barry from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm also a newspaper writer, and I identify with the Shia in some aspects because I also feel that I'm a part of an American oppressed majority, and I do not agree with any wars at all. I'm a Christian, and I believe that Jesus implored us to love our enemies. And I wonder that we have identified ourselves with the Sunni because these followers of Ali represent something that would oppress our ability to have good relations with Mecca.
I don't think so. I mean, it's they won't be. I don't think either way it affects our relationships with with Islam. I mean, we should recognize that there are different strains in Islam, and we can learn from all of them.
Andrew Cockburn, thank you very much for being on the Washington Journal.
You're welcome.
Tomorrow, our show comes to you live from the Wall Street Journal's Washington Bureau. Right now, we are going to go live to a special briefing at the State Department for the release of their 2003 annual report on international religious freedom.
Spending the holidays at home this year.